The first people who turn up at your gate will be a nice husband and wife team, or a man and a woman, and they'll be bringing cookies. Yeah, and they'll come in and, oh, let's have some cup of tea. And if you still say no, the next person who comes in he'll be a bit tougher. You know, he might be a beefy sort of character, and he'll say, well, yeah, we can take you to court, you know. And we've got 14 QCs on hand too, if we do. How many QCs have you got?
When we came here 13 years ago, you couldn't see a light in any direction of a night. It was quiet and peaceful, and that's how we like it. If we wanted to live with lights and noise, we'd have went and lived in the city.
It is not an industry that has a light environmental footprint. Despite all the lies their spin doctors go on with, and the massive advertising campaigns that they've engaged in, saying that they're clean and green, they're not.
The government and the industry were promoting this as this is the best thing. They talked about coexistence, but they never gave you an indication of what it really truly meant and what was actually really going to happen.
They knew that they were going to do a major con job on Australia. And our governments were either naive or bought off, and people generally were completely unknowledgeable about what they were all about.
Representatives of the gas companies, you know when they're lying because their lips are moving. You cannot believe anything they say.
I'm proud of our environmental record. I'm proud of the way we operate, but our record does speak for itself. We're a responsible company. We've got a proven track record of safe operations. The industry is very well regulated, and we do everything we can to minimise our footprint.
I think when you look at the history of what we're seeing in Queensland, where there's quite serious allegations of impacts, the biggest problem is that the industry is not monitored and transparent to anywhere near the degree that government and industry claim. So the scientific basis for claims about the safety of CSG I cannot be sustained.
We see in Queensland, we see from the US what the coal seam gas industry does to country. It just turns it into industrial area that's completely unusable for agriculture.
We let this happen without so much as a whimper in our country. It's changed everything about our farming operation. We can't drink the water out of the wells anymore. We have to ventilate our homes so they won't explode because of the methane that comes out of the water. And probably the biggest thing that's happened is our property is worth nothing now.
They bring nothing to the table, and we ask them, what do you bring to us? What have you got that we want? They can't answer the question.
The Queensland Valuer General, with the very first well on a rural property, devalues it somewhere between 10 and 12%, and it's basically incremental thereafter. And obviously, if you're living next door to a property with a gas field on it, you will be impacted.
We have already experienced direct negative impacts, even though we don't have a single gas well on the property.
People just don't realise how much vehicular traffic and people you got on your place when they're drilling and putting in all this infrastructure. Something like about 200 vehicles per well.
This is the reverse osmosis plant at night. We were probably 2 kilometres away from it there. It runs day and night.
I would love to have here, show you my father's Petroleum and Gas Act. The whole book is fallen apart. He has, notes through the entire PNG Act. That just shows you what level a landowner has to get to be able to understand what was actually going to happen on his farm, on his home.
There are families. This is a gentleman. He owns this property down the left-hand side of the well there. His family home was 1.7 kilometres away, and they became sleep deprived, and this flare goes day and night. He says it's like a jet engine just constantly going. And this is that same flare 40 kilometres away, and the light effect that it has.
A lot of people have walked off. Some families have been bought out, and there is a really big issue of mental health impacts and guilt, like how they cope with this issue of the fact that they can't leave because how do you take a huge family and move it? Where do you move it to? Where do you actually live?
Bob Catter was saying every 3 weeks is a suicide in outback Queensland.
When George took his life, in October 2015, he was 68. That day, for whatever reason, that was enough. He'd had enough. And most people get to a point where they can't deal with it anymore, so they sign. And George refused to sign because that wasn't right.
They never accept any liability for anything that goes wrong. The best thing you can do is meet them at the front gate, lock the gate and have the fight up front before you let them put a foot on your property.
I cried when I left Queensland. I cried that we'd been there and we'd seen them and they'd shared their stories and they were just begging us to listen and to see what it really was doing to their lives. They'd shared so much. It is almost like our responsibility to not ignore their cry. They were begging us not to ignore it, not to ignore the seriousness of it, and to not be able to offer anything to them really other than to listen was really, really gut-wrenching.
Queensland was always the icing on the cake for these companies. It's where most of the gas is, but it's also my home. And now I go out to Chinchilla and I just see gas wells everywhere I look. And a town that's not really itself anymore, doesn't know itself. My heart just sinks every time I think about it.
We wanted to see it, and we came back totally saddened and angered to see what's happened.
I think Australians need to be really brave, not just in the country but as a whole now, and to actually ask, is this really what we want? Is this what we want for our future, and for what? You know, are we prepared to take that risk now? And I just know so many people that say it's not worth the risk.